Hey there, welcome to Between Two Moose. My name is Chris Sessoms. I'm Director of Academic Affairs at D2L, and we are here today with, of course, the Kenneth Chapman, Vice President of Market Research, the Ernie to my Bert, the a Fred to my Ginger, and today on Between Two Moose, we're going to be talking about things that keep Ken and I up at night. And I'm sure this will be a very interesting episode. I have no idea what Ken has in store for us, and nor does he know what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to kick it over to Ken first.
Thank you, sir. Chris, I'm really excited for this one too. I don't know what it means, but in preparing for today's episode, last night I scratched out some of my notes and the things that keep you up at night, it comes easy to write down. And oddly enough, I had one of the best sleeps I've ever had last night. So for all of those of you that let me vent out these frustrations, thank you very much for letting me get a good night's sleep. It's interesting. I mean, as someone that works at an education technology company, there's a lot of things that keep us up at night and that concern us about how do we really help our customers and the institutions we work with make some real impactful transformation, and not just be busy with technology and doing technology things. And there are so many things that we hear on a day-to-day basis that we understand, that we listen to, and we challenge ourselves with and struggle, how do we really work through? The ones that really stand out for me, and the thing I think that's got me tossing and turning and flipping blankets off the most, is the conversation that's constantly bubbling up around right now around machine learning and artificial intelligence applications. The first thing that keeps me up at night and rolling a little bit is AI. We're not there with artificial intelligence. We're not even talking about a lot of applications really in the realm of artificial intelligence. We're talking about pattern recognition and machine learning and applying some pretty well understood and baseline statistical techniques to teach us things about our data. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just like to not marry that with artificial intelligence as a whole, which is a much more generalized domain. But as a vendor in EdTech, it's hard to think about all of the different applications and opportunities that machine learning and algorithmic analysis can have on learning data when we don't see that triangle captured rigorously and consistently. And by that triangle, I mean, what is the learning objective or the learning outcome? What type of assessment or indicators of success or mastery are there for that objective? And what are the different learning activities, interactions, and content that will drive towards that mastery and that demonstration of knowledge? Those things exist. A lot of the educators that spend a ton of time and energy working online have those things, but they're not always in a machine readable or a machine capturable format. And that is a massive barrier holding back a lot of the progress, I think, in machine learning applications and learning technology. From really understanding a full-scale curriculum design and learning engineering process, you need to have that integrity of that data and that context behind all of the different learner interaction data and an interaction with an individual content activity or learning experience needs to have that context chain to know how it fits into the whole and how you can leverage insight on that information to feed back on it. So for me, that's the real key one. And I've seen some heroic efforts at a lot of customer sites to do this. I think we've learned a lot about how to lower the barriers and capturing some of that information, but I think there's still a lot of opportunity there for algorithm aided suggestions for how to tag and connect this information, so that as a whole we're working off of a real disciplined and comparable data set. Chris, I will let you talk at one point, but the reason that really gets me thinking is, as the lines between academia and the workforce start to blur, there needs to be a way to translate and to talk about how do all of these different triangles fit together and make up the skills gap and the understanding that providers and consumers of learning need to have to make sure that they're actually going to have marketable skills and be competitive and that sort of thing.
No,
That's mine, Chris.
no, I can see I could see where that does keep you up. I mean, I think given your perspective, given your place at D2L and all that you're able to see both internally, behind the scenes, how the sausage is made, and working with clients, the AI thing does come up. It's one that I'm not sure. It's one that I think is still confusing to a lot of people. What exactly AI is and what its intention is and how we think about AI. I think about the same thing about data. I'm seeing a lot on Twitter concerning the use of student data or just data in general at companies and what we do with that data. And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there that really worries me, that people are thinking that companies like ours are running out and just, selling student data to the highest bidder. And that's so far from reality. We don't even dare sell, we're never going to sell student data for that any purpose at all. So I always want to make sure, I worry when I see Twitter and I see all this speculation of what companies are doing with the data. And I know that we do use the data in a de-identified way to help us make a better product. I mean, that's really what the data is used mostly for. And to your point about sort of the long-term workforce issues, one of the things that really keeps me up at night is thinking about how universities and colleges and institutions can build a more robust relationship with their students across the student's lifetime. I get frustrated when I'm at universities and talking to folks and I say, well, how are you going to build a relationship with your students more than just the 2 years or the 4 years that you have them there? How are you thinking about maintaining a relationship throughout their lifetime, and not just an alumnus giving money every year, but how are you thinking about the adult learner, the non-traditional learner, as somebody that is looking for a relationship, is looking for a relationship with an institution that they trust, that gives them something. I mean, I got something from my university in my time at my university, and it was really the network that was one of the most important things that I got, people that I could trust and turn to. And I'm wondering how universities are able to capitalize on this and build stronger relationships is something that keeps me up. It's completely out of my control, but it's something I do think about a lot, and it does keep me up.
Yeah, I like the point on data as well. I'll come back to that. For anybody that's just joining us, welcome to Between Two Moose. Chris and I are talking about what keeps us up at night. So extremely important stuff. We want us sleeping well. And we want to thank everybody that's been tuning in. We're really excited that we're seeing 10,000 to 15,000 views on these episodes. So thank you very much. Keep telling us what's useful to hear about and share away. Chris, I think it's really important, to eliminate any concern and to create that trust around data, particularly, when you're working outside of the institution and making relationships with a vendor or an open source community or whatever the case may be. That sense of trust and knowing that there's a shared alignment on the goals of accessing that data is absolutely critical. As someone that works at what we see ourselves as a learning company, selling advertisements is very counterproductive to that goal and making data available for that purpose. So yeah, it's important that institutions, one, understand that it's their own data. Two, understand that there's a huge amount of responsibility and custodianship that they need to take on, and that they need to understand the confines and constraints of whatever technology platform they're using, and how do they use that to their advantage to put in place the governance and automate all of the practices around secure access to data that need to be there. Because there's a lot of different potential eyes and hands touching that data. And more often there's great use cases for that, but it needs to be in a really controlled way. So our experience has been a really, really flexible and dynamic model for who has access to what data at what time, both enables the organization and protects it and allowing it to put in place its governance practices and not having to layer on extra technology or workflows to support that.
No, that's really important. I think that I see so much disinformation now around data and data use. So I'm glad you addressed it that way, Ken. Another thing that a lot of these things that keep me up at night are I dare say related to status quo issues. One of the things that I've always been challenged by is people who are satisfied with the way things are. And maybe that's just the nature of the way I was raised. Clearly, it was the part of the way I was raised. But I was brought up in a household that was always looking to how do we get better? How do I improve? Knowing that I'm giving my best effort, but I know I can go back and I can try harder. There's always places for me to improve. And I guess that's the one thing that frustrates me in some cases with some institutions that I've worked with, that people that get satisfied with the status quo and don't really want to challenge their own thinking and think, how can I do this better? And really being student-centered in that regard, because it's so easy as a faculty member for me to just get up and read from my notes rather than engage my students in an actual dialogue or activities that are, frankly, put me in a very uncomfortable spot for a short time because I don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So learning to sort of, how can I influence folks, institutions to try something different, to step away from the status quo?
Yeah, I like the way you hit on the sort of social, emotional aspects of that. I worry about that as well. One of the things that really kept me up at night, literally about 2 weeks ago, is I had asked a group of people in a feedback session, what will the student experience look like? What will the teaching experience look like 10 years from now? And an answer I got was the same. And that doesn't resonate well, and it makes me concerned. How much effort is being made in a systematic way to talk to the students and to ask them, again, that triangle is all well and good, but what are the different ways that are really engaging to them, that resonate with their background, their experiences, their interests, with their expectation as creators, and as, first-class citizens and front row participants when they're working online. So, we think about, what are the ways again, as a provider of a learning platform, that we can start to capture and learn from the different emotional states and reactions that students have as they're interacting with curriculum, as they're interacting with each other. And what can we learn from that to try to mindfully design some of those elements in there? And, in our last episode, we talked about things like reward schedules. Those are really important things to be able to have instrumentation around and know, what are the things that are firing people in that right sweet spot where they're in that challenge state, that Goldilocks zone. But with a mechanical view of learning activities and not the human experience on top of that, we lose out on a layer of that potentially. So learning's going to change in 10 years. I think that's the promise of learning technology is to support those types of things at scale. So if it hasn't changed in 10 years, we're not doing our job.
No, that was one of the myths that I used to hear in teacher college, where they would say, imagine if we brought Benjamin Franklin, a famous American, back to life, and we walked him into a classroom. Would it look any different than the classroom that he attended when he was a young man? And in most cases, 9 out of 10 instructors would say, no, they look exactly the same.
His classroom probably had mixed age and benefited from that.
Exactly. Yeah, and a little more socially, emotionally attuned, perhaps even at that level. So that's one thing that's always been kind of curious. Another thing that I've learned now, coming from the classroom and the university setting to a learning company, one of the things that I've learned in developing software and solutions is that it takes longer than I ever thought, and it's not the fault of engineers going, "Gee, what do we do?" When I sit down with a client and they go, "Hey, can you fix this one little piece in your software?" and I would say, "Oh, it seems easy enough." And I go back and I talk to a designer, an engineer. I learned very quickly that little things are big things in
Mm.
software. You can probably speak more to that than I can.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you have millions of people using a system multiple times a day, the flying cars that we were drawing on the whiteboard in 2003 that we were expecting to be flying around in online learning, by 2010, they would set a lot of servers on fire, and there's lots of lots of good reasons to slow down, to do things well. But you're right, things don't move as fast as you expect them to. Chris, as with your background as an educator, there's one of the things that keeps me up at night that we've never had a chance to talk about in private, so let's do it in public. As a vendor, as an organization that's been partnering with customers 20 years, we've learned a lot about some of the practices that are really effective for different delivery modalities, for different capabilities of instructor persona. We have a lot of insight. How prescriptive should vendors like us, should technology organizations be in trying to advocate for push, beyond the adoption, but into more, effective utilization based on what we've learned?
That's a super question. That's a $10,000 question. I think we're regularly faced with that. I know I am, when they say, well, what do you think? And I find myself responding in the classic, as I call it, English major response, which is yes and. And I was always raised as an educator to avoid a certain amount of prescription and instead say, well, what do you think, right? So let's look at the scenario, let's lay this out, and say, here are three possibilities. Which one do you think would be best resonate with you? And sometimes I'm looked at like, just tell me the answer, right? Just tell me the answer. And other times I'm told, thank you for giving us the chance to make the decision. I mean, ultimately, one of my favorite sayings is, if you're doing more work in your classroom as an instructor, who's learning more, you or your students? And I think this is true in the case that you just illustrated. If I prescribe for you, how much are you actually learning versus doing it yourself and going, okay, there were three options here, I'm going to go for option A. Oops, that didn't work. No, now you know. Mm-hmm. But it's hard because I think we are regularly asked to be prescriptive around technology, and I think many of us try and resist that. I don't know about you and your experience, but I know I try to resist being prescriptive. Sometimes I just want to go, here's what you need to do, and then that's it. But then my parent mode kicks in, and my parent mode goes, no, I've got to teach them to fish. I got to figure out how they're going to make the decision. Because one day I'm not going to be there to guide my kids, so I want them to be able to make the best decisions they can.
Yeah.
That's where I end up.
I think about it in a crawl, walk, run sort of mindset, but again, there's no chalk on my hands. So, I mean, I'm coming from what I've absorbed, but, I get the sense that there's value in providing more context, more information about why does this ability to create this interaction or whatever in an online environment, why could it be used? Here's a few examples. Reduce the distance between here's a tool and how do I use it by putting access to community resources and recipes and how-to type of thing. But the statistician in me and the satisfied Clippy user, for old school MS Office reference, kind of still thinks that there's value in, oh, it looks like you're creating an online course. Can I help you design some learning activities around these learning objectives? We did an experiment years ago as part of an R&D project in Canada for building out an instructional design wizard using the ADDIE design model and walking through it. And it had limited success in terms of utilization, but I still see sparks of how relevant some of the things that it did to help create some scaffolding and structure for where you lay in domain-specific information. So it's a conversation I'll have whenever I have the opportunity to look how furrowed brows are, or how sort of interest lines I'm seeing in them. So yours is a combination of the two, Chris, but we're not in that high def right now.
Well, great. Well, looks like we're about at the end of our time, Ken. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Between Two Moose. It's been my pleasure, as always, Ken, to have this opportunity to chat with you. We will be back in January with our next episode. So please, if you have any questions, please drop them below, and we will get to those as soon as we can. And we look forward to seeing you again next month.
Happy holidays.